off, Paxton?
Yeah, we can do, but I want Liz to do the roll call first anyway, please.
Okay. If I start with the Child and Family Services panel members, Cyril Anderson, Mike Day,
Here.
Mike Dirk, Kevin Griffiths,
Yes.
Paxton Hood-Williams,
I am.
Yvonne Jardine, Susan Jones,
Yes.
Erica Kirshner, Wendy Lewis,
Yes, sure.
Des Thomas.
Yes.
Okay, Adult Services panel, Mandy Evans. Okay, Joe Hale and Chris Holly have given their apologies. Jeff Jones,
Yes, yeah.
Hazel Morris, Gloria Tanner,
Present.
Tony Bedo. No. Okay. Elliot King,
Yes, I'm here.
Louise Gibbard,
Yes, yes, present.
Dave House, Julie Davis,
I'm here.
Jane Whitmore,
Yes, I'm here.
Kelly Richards,
Yes, I'm here.
Megan Stevens,
Yes, I'm here. Hi.
Damien Rees.
Yeah, I'm here. Good afternoon, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Items on the agenda, first of all. Oh, sorry, better welcome. I didn't do that today. Welcome everybody to this meeting. Obviously, at this point in time, it's because of the item 6 on the agenda, which is domestic violence, domestic abuse. Obviously, we've invited members of Adult Social Services to attend this meeting today, and obviously they're here because they've already acknowledged the fact that they are here. Obviously, if they want to leave at the end of this session, this item on the agenda, item 6, then they're welcome so to do. So it's a meeting of both, at the moment, both Adult Social Services and Child and Family Services. So I'm pleased to see everybody here. Warm welcome also to officers, because we've got a fair number of officers in, about half a dozen at the moment, I think, on that quick roll call, and to the cabinet members as well. So we're pleased to see you. So on that basis, I will move on now and say item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. I know we've had 2 from Adult Social Services. I don't think we've had any others, Liz, have we?
No, no other apologies.
Okay. Item 3 is the prohibition. Sorry, item 2 is the disclosure of personal prejudicial interests. If anybody has anything to disclose at the moment, please do so. I'm not seeing any hands up there at the moment, so okay. Item 3 is a prohibition of whip votes and declaration of party whips. Item 4 is the minutes of the previous meeting with the members of Child and Family Services. Obviously, you've seen the minutes of the last meeting, and it was a joint meeting anyway, so I think they've already been approved. But if anybody's got anything they want to raise in terms of matters arising, then this is your opportunity so to do. I didn't see anything, there was anything there particularly that needed to be picked up at this time. Again, no hands up, so I'll move on to item 5, public question times, and I don't think we've had any questions, Liz.
No, no questions submitted.
Okay, thank you very much. And that moves us on to the substantive part of the agenda in that sense then. Item 6, which is the West Audit Office report on tackling violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence. Obviously, this is a topic which has been of concern both to Child and Family Services and Adult Social Services, and particularly during this pandemic as well. So we're very pleased to have a number of officers here, and we have the report from we've had the report from Welsh Government as well, or Welsh Audit Office, I should say, rather than Welsh Government. So I don't know who wants to present this and who's going to lead on it, or does one of the cabinet members, in particular, Louise, want to say something first of all?
Yeah, thank you,
do it.
Chair. If I may, yeah, I'll just make some introductory comments, and then we've got a sort of triple team of officers in Jane Whitmore, Kelly Richards, and Megan Stevens, who are going to sort of pick up some of the points in the report. So yeah, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to bring this to panel today. I think it's always really worthwhile to highlight the range of work that is going on in this incredibly important area, which obviously has been in the news over the last few weeks, in particular because of recent high-profile cases, and obviously during the pandemic, lots of news reports about increasing numbers of violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence. So really want to thank our officers for the work that they do on this all the time. And it is very much a cross-council approach, as you said, between sort of both parts of social services, but also in other departments as well. We have a lot of support from housing, tackling poverty, all of those officers. And also, of course, our partner organisations. We work very closely with third sector organisations across Swansea and across the region. So obviously this report is looking back at the findings of the Welsh Audit Office and how we are implementing those generic recommendations in Swansea. And I think that it did highlight particular areas of good practice here. And I hope you'll agree that a great deal of work has been going on in spite of and because of the pandemic, in fact, and there's been some really positive lessons learnt in spite of everything, in terms of the partnership working that we've been doing. I think that some of the officers are going to pick up on the blended approach to talking with service users online, where they might not necessarily engage face to face in the past. So yes, I think I'll hand over to the officers now to kind of pick up some of the more specific points, and then I'm happy to take questions at the end. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Louise. And who's going to take us through this to start off with?
Thank you.
Jane, I think. Yeah.
Okay, Jane.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for having us. And just to pick up from what Louise has said. So this was due to come to a scrutiny committee just before, probably before the pandemic. So back in 2018, we were part of the Welsh Audit Office review and fieldwork of how local authorities and public bodies and our partners are implementing the VAWDA SV Act. I'll call it VAWDA SV. It's a very long acronym, but because that act came into force back in 2015, and it is different in Wales than it is in England. So Welsh Audit Office were really keen to see how councils and public bodies were doing in terms of discharging that duty and actually working through that together. So as is noted in the report, there was 5 generic recommendations that came out around needs assessment about how we work, but we've made really good progress on all of them. And I think as Megan and Kelly talked through the detail of the report, you can see how that's been embedded, and more so actually in terms of the pandemic that came into force back last year. So we've met all the recommendations of the report, and we had a particular mention in the report that was published around our work around the Domestic Abuse Hub, which was implemented prior to that, which was really found to be a really innovative and different way of working, bringing the councils staff together with the police, with health, with our specialist providers, and taking that sort of multi-agency holistic approach around domestic abuse. So really pleased with the report, and really pleased about how that partnership has grown, especially since then, and how developed further. So I'm going to come back in when it comes to the funding bit towards the end, but I'm going to hand over to Megan now to take you through the rest of it, if that's all right, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm the VAWDA SV Partnership Development Practice Lead. So I lead on the VAWDA SV strategy and the local partnership. So initially, following the publication of the report towards the end of 2019, the first thing we did in response to that was reinvigorate the VAWDA SV leadership group and the subgroups. So we placed a real emphasis on making sure that the right partners were around the table, that they were fully engaged, aware of what their expectations were on them, and that there was clear kind of focus of all the subgroups. Sorry, Mike, did you have your hand up? Did you want to come in?
Sorry,
I was
Mike.
just registering for asking a question towards the end. I didn't want to interrupt the presentation, so
no.
perhaps I can just leave that on the table, as it were.
Absolutely, yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
So that was kind of towards the end of 2019, and then shortly after that exercise, the pandemic hit fairly early last year. So that kind of shifted our focus towards sort of COVID response. So in Q1 of last year, when the pandemic first kind of hit, what we saw was a discrepancy between the media reporting of these massive increases in domestic abuse and the reporting on the ground. There was actually a drop in referrals, a drop in reporting to the police, and a drop in referrals to the specialist sector, suggesting that people either weren't able to reach out and access support or felt that they couldn't for whatever reason. So we really focused on communications in those early stages. So we did a kind of multimedia communications campaign using videos, all different types of messaging. We worked with the supermarkets to make sure they had posters up and large-scale trailers across the city. We worked with Microsoft to develop a chatbot, which is sort of an interactive information service, really, that's available on our website that people can access anonymously 24/7. We also were conscious of digital poverty, so not everybody has access to the internet and equipment, so we secured some funding to make sure that families affected by domestic abuse could access those services online where possible. So we distributed tablets, Wi-Fi dongles and mobile phones to those families affected. So towards the end of Q1, we started to see an increase in demand for emergency housing. So more and more people trying to get into refuge, and obviously no increased refuge provision necessarily. So we work closely with our partners in housing and Swansea University to utilise some of the accommodation there. And we worked with our specialist providers as well to make sure that there was resource, support attached to that accommodation. I think Kelly's going to take you into Q2.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Kelly Richards. I'm the Principal Officer for our Early Help Hubs in Swansea and the single point of contact, which is the front door to services from child and family. So during the summer, we saw an increase in referrals to our IDVA service, the Independent Domestic Violence Advocate Service, for high-risk victims who had been assessed either by South Wales Police or by any involved professional. This increased the caseloads in the IDVA service, and we worked closely with Welsh Government and with the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office in order to identify funding so that we could increase our capacity and resource, but also so that we could consider some training opportunities for wider staff groups and professionals who may already be involved in families, but would benefit from being able to offer them the right advice around Voucher SV issues. We also had the launch in Swansea of Operation Encompass, which is a mechanism whereby South Wales Police share information directly with head teachers about children who are in their schools. So the launch of Operation Encompass was around the same time as we reorganised our early help services in Swansea, who became part of Child and Family Services. This meant that we now were able to have oversight of far more children and young people who were living in households where domestic abuse was occurring. So the multi-agency teams that we have set up across Swansea and the multi-agency early help hubs, which includes PCSOs as part of the South Wales Police Early Action Together project, meant that we had early identifiers of children who were living in these households, but we also were able to work with the staff to make sure that they were receiving the right service at the right time, and hopefully from people that they already had an existing relationship with. So as we went through Q2, we adapted really quickly to remote working. As Megan said, we were able to provide some of the families that we were supporting with the technology to enable them to undertake and receive that support remotely. And in some instances, that actually promoted better engagement. So there were some families that were more comfortable engaging with us remotely, that we may never have had the opportunity to meet face to face. So we are planning going forward of developing a blended approach to supporting victims and their families who are experiencing Vowder SV issues, so that this will maximise our opportunities to engage people across a variety of platforms, but also face-to-face and in community hubs, which will be easy for them to access. So I think we're going to move back on to Jane now, is it?
No, it's back to me.
Megan, sorry.
Okay, so moving into Q3 then, towards the end of last year, as we'd sort of settled into our new ways of working, we sort of started to refocus really on some of our pre-COVID objectives, because obviously we had a lot of planning prior to the COVID pandemic, and we wanted to kind of pick up some of that where we left off. So one of the key focus areas for us was perpetrator intervention. We already had an established perpetrator group within Child and Family, which is called Equilibrium, that works with medium and standard risk perpetrators. But Q3 of last year saw the implementation of the DRIVE programme, which is a high risk, high harm perpetrator intervention that sits above Equilibrium. So the idea is that there's an offer for different types of perpetrators depending on the level of risk and the severity of the abuse. And we also started working towards a real whole systems approach, because there was still that kind of gap sitting underneath those for the really early intervention, the light touch stuff. So we've developed a bid now and sort of put a bid towards Welsh Women's Aid to look at pulling in some of that real prevention work, and hopefully that will provide us with a whole systems approach then leading into next year. And we also developed some training with a focus on holding perpetrators to account, because so much of the training that was commissioned by Welsh Gov was very much victim focused. And, you know, as we've seen in the recent weeks, it's not necessarily the victims that are the issue, it's the perpetrators. So there's a real sort of emphasis on developing work in that area. One of the other things that was a priority then as well was the Ask and Act rollout. So Ask and Act is a mandatory piece of Welsh Government training. It's being rolled out all across Wales, and our primary target groups for that is social services, child and family and adult services. So rollout of Ask and Act has begun. It's a half-day piece of training on identifying the signs and symptoms of Vowder SV, but also knowing how to respond if there's a disclosure. So that rollout started in Q3 last year. Back to Kelly, I think, for some more child and family.
Yeah. So in Child and Family Services, as I said earlier, we were able to identify a lot more children who may be supported either through school or through early help. So when we were receiving notifications from South Wales Police, very often we were able to forward those on to the already allocated social worker, and the responsibility for safeguarding those children would lie with those workers within that team. Any information that we received on open cases was shared, and that information was disseminated back into the MARAC via our single point of contact. So we have a practice lead who represents Child and Family Services at the MARAC. Any new cases that were received were considered in our domestic abuse hub or in our information advice and assistance team, and we would then have the what matters conversation with the families, undertake a proportionate assessment, and then redirect them on to the best service to meet their needs. And if the concerns were at a level where we thought the children were at risk of harm, then we would escalate those to our safeguarding hub. Now, all of these teams sit under one portfolio, which makes the moving of families in between different teams as their needs escalate and de-escalate a much smoother process. We've developed paperwork that travels with the family so that they don't have to tell their story more than once, and that their plan goes with them. So the Domestic Abuse Hub, or mostly Megan, also attends the regional MARAC steering group. It's chaired by South Wales Police, but we use that group in order to identify trends in referrals. We use it to look at whether there are any training needs across multi-organisations and where we need to focus our attentions, really. That group, along with a number of other groups, feeds into our Vowder SV leadership group, which is chaired by Louise. And the leadership group is a forum where we, along with our partners, including the third sector, health, education, South Wales Police. We share data. We consider whether there are any areas of unmet need. And then we set up groups then in order to progress the priorities around the next year in order to meet some of those needs. And some of those groups, I think they are in the document. That we're looking at accommodation for women who have complex needs and who struggle to maintain placements in refuge accommodation, including those who may be exploited by the sex industry. We are working on developing our equilibrium programme so that we can provide specialist support for male victims, but also for older people and for the LGBTQ community. But we're also making sure that support for both perpetrators and victims in those groups is as easily accessible as possible. And then we're doing some primary prevention work and hoping to set up a sexual violence service. So there's lots of stuff that we've got plans to do, you know, some of it already in progress and some of it for the next year as our priorities.
Thanks.
And I think it's Jane. Yeah,
it's back to me. Yeah, it is. And really just feeding on from that is around how we resource and fund the identified gaps that come forward, as Kelly's described and as Megan have talked about. So we've been lucky this year. A lot of this area is funded. There is a council core contribution that goes into funding this area, but a lot of the area is funded by different grants from Welsh Government or the Police and Crime Commissioners. So that we draw down, but there's been additional funding made available in the housing support grant, which is a Welsh Government funding pot, which used to be called Supporting People, and that our traditional refuges are funded from there. However, there's more money that's come down the line, so we have been able to address some of the gaps that are identified by an additional. So there's an additional 250,000 going into this area to fund an extra IDVA worker, so some domestic abuse perpetrator focused workers, specialist support workers around the sexual exploitation SWAN project. So it's not necessarily all council staff. That this is split between council provision and specialist provider provision as well, and advice and information worker again, where different funding pots have ended and there would be a gap. So we've continued to do that through the additional funds that have come down for the next financial year. Also, Welsh Government have made available approximately just over £300,000 worth of additional funding through what they've called a needs-based activity grant, which is a one-off and particularly around the capital for dispersed accommodation. So again, that thinking about how we utilise that to actually to support some of the gaps that have come on around primary prevention work, sexual violence. And again, it's not just going to the council, it's going to all of our different providers to actually make sure that we do take a sort of holistic approach to it. So in terms of the funding element of this agenda, it's pretty positive because there has been additional grant funding available to us. But I guess it always does come with a risk because it is grant funding, and the longevity of it is something that we need to think of as we move forward, and how we make sure that we are supporting this agenda going forward rather than it just disappearing if the grants come out. So it's always a challenge, but it's something that we, you know, in terms of our data and our and needs assessments and commissioning activities, is actually making sure that we're understanding what's out there and how we work in a different way to meet the need, which I think, as both Kelly and Megan have explained, that how that multi-agency working and integrating with other services is really a really positive way forward. So I think that I'm going to hand back over to Meg just for the summary at the end, and then we can go for questions. Thanks, Meg.
Okay, so our sort of key next steps really for the next year, we've identified our priority areas as Kelly mentioned. So it's like the complex need accommodation, the male victims, older people services, LGBTQ. We've got sort of a really clear set of priorities, and we've developed an action plan around that to drive forward. But in a more general sense, we're looking to really strengthen the joint working between adult services and child and family. We work closely with the safeguarding team in adult services, and they've got a domestic abuse lead now. We're looking at delivering some training specifically to that team and really strengthening the pathways between the two teams. We're going to continue to drive the everyone's business model. So we're really promoting the message that domestic abuse, Fowler SV, is everybody's business. It's not just a police issue, and that we all have a responsibility to address it. So again, that's building on those partnerships with housing, education, and the council in general. To continue to build on our existing partnerships. So partnerships, in my view, have never been stronger. At the start of the pandemic last year, we had weekly meetings with our specialist providers, just to really monitor how they were doing, basically what trends they were seeing on the ground, any gaps that emerged, and they've given us really, really positive feedback about how they felt the council has supported them through the pandemic. We also want to continue to work regionally, so we do work closely with our counterparts in Neath, Port Talbot, to make sure that where possible, we're identifying opportunities for regional commissioning, but also regional messaging as well. So in our awareness raising campaigns and our communications, a consistent message across the region. So we'll continue to strengthen that and build on it. And also continue with our awareness raising. So we work quite closely with Welsh Government. I attend regular groups with Welsh Government for various things, but we're really in tune with them basically on their messaging. They're continuing to push the Home Shouldn't Be a Place of Fear campaign for the next 6 months, and I think their next campaign will be looking at honour-based abuse. So we're aligning our communications campaign to the national picture as well. I think that's it.
Okay. I don't know if you want to sum up on any of that, Louise, before I say anything more.
No, I think they've covered it very thoroughly, and I think I hope you agree it's a very good report. I would just say, that kind of like they do on the BBC, if anyone's watching this and is affected by these issues, do go onto the council website, swansea.gov.uk/you are not alone. That's our chat bot. If you're worried about yourself or anybody else, it's like an automatic thing where you ask it questions and it gives you suggested answers, and it can signpost you to services locally and national helplines and things like that. So there is lots of support there for anyone affected by these issues.
Okay, thank you, Louise. And can I say thank you then for the comprehensive report? It's obviously very interesting, a matter of grave concern, I think, as far as we're all concerned in this respect, and particularly the impact that the pandemic was going to have in this respect. And from a child and family point of view, I'll have a couple of questions afterwards, but I'll come back to that. But can I just say it was an excellent team effort. It seemed to move very smoothly from one presenter to another. Most professional. Thank you very much for that. And I'll just now open it up for questions. And Mike, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks ever so much for the presentation. And I think probably we'd all agree that it's really disappointing that we're having to talk about these sorts of issues, and we wish that we didn't have to put in place all these different mechanisms and support that seems to be so needed. But I think we're all fully aware of the publicity and media coverage that there's been in terms of recognising how people might get hold of that help, and I'm really confident in the support that you've outlined and the work that's going on. So thank you, and to all of your colleagues for providing that. I'd like to talk a little bit more about two aspects. First of all would be the prevention element, which Megan, I think you touched upon, and secondly about the working with other organisations and agencies. So in the report that you provided us with, I think it's the last printed page, it talks about primary prevention work across the region. You did make a brief reference to it, and I wondered if you could link that in terms of a little bit more information about prevention, because that's really what we would want to do, isn't it, to stop this happening, rather than kind of picking up the pieces afterwards, and then link it in then with work that you might be doing with education in particular, not just in terms of children highlighting concerns that they have, but also trying to educate them at an early stage about the issues, the dangers, the problems from domestic violence, and wondered about things like, for example, with the links with School Beat, which I know that they've been doing quite a bit of work with people on how to address that issue with children. So it's just those two particular points, if I may.
Yeah, absolutely. So so prevention work, I mean, we've had the Domestic Abuse Hub is preventative in that it tries to intervene at an earlier point before it goes over to kind of more statutory services, but it is secondary prevention because we're intervening because something has happened. So what we're looking at with our sort of new prevention approach is real primary prevention. So like you said, stopping it before it even happens. So there's a huge issue really, and it kind of starts at a young age and then continues throughout education and further. So Welsh Government encourage a whole schools approach, and that's something that we're working towards. So that includes a few things. First of all, there is the curriculum. So domestic abuse and violence against women has been incorporated into the new RSE curriculum, and they've worked closely with Welsh Women's Aid on that. So there's a consistent approach across Wales. Another element of that is training. So it'll be training teachers and other school staff in recognising the signs and symptoms of abuse in the parents, but also knowing what to do when the child makes a disclosure in the classroom. So it's kind of approaching the children and the parent. Spectrum goes into schools at the moment. So that's a programme run by Haven Cymru, and they go in and do it's not targeted, they just offer kind of general awareness raising, and then Operation Encompass looks at a more targeted approach. So if there is a child who's been in a household where there's been a domestic abuse incident, the school is notified and can offer a sort of nurture-based intervention. So education sit on our leadership group, and we've got some close links there. So yeah, there's a plan moving forward to really work towards the whole school approach, but that work has already very much started. As well as that, our Domestic Abuse Hub offer a consultation service. So just this week, actually, I think in response to the media, a comprehensive school approached us saying that they wanted to run some sessions and assemblies. So our Domestic Abuse Hub staff were able to send over some lesson plans and resources. So on a kind of ad hoc basis as well, we're engaging with those schools. And in terms of the older sort of population, so the primary prevention approach we're looking at is something that's on offer from Welsh Women's Aid, and it's called Change That Lasts. It's being rolled out in Cardiff, so it's already been offered in Cardiff, so we'll be following their lead, and there's a three-pronged approach to it. One of the approaches is called Ask Me, and that's about going out into the community and raising awareness on what to happen if, for example, you hear a domestic abuse incident happening in your neighbour's house, or you're in the shop and somebody you bump into has a black eye and is clearly frightened. So it's really about reaching out to the community, and it offers a day's training course to community members to make them what they call an Ask Me ambassador. So it's an awareness raising programme for community individuals, looking at targeting sports coaches, hairdressers, taxi drivers, members of the public who are quite likely potentially to come across those victims. And then there's another element of it called Clear, and that is the perpetrator element of it. So that's almost the flip of it then. So that's what to do if you're concerned about somebody else's behaviour or even your own, because there are individuals who can recognise, that they may have unhealthy responses in relationships themselves and want to approach that. So that's kind of the approach. It's very much a sort of information, education, changing attitudes, challenging attitudes, right from school right the way up. So I hope I've answered your question there.
If I could just add to that, if I may, and definitely wanted to flag up the new curriculum as Megan has done, because I think in a lot of ways we're on looking into this in a serious way in Wales, which is really good to see. And just to flag up as well, I think most of us here are probably in terms of councillors or school governors. It would be really useful if governing bodies could have a domestic abuse link governor and a domestic abuse policy for the school. I mean, I'm sure you've already got safeguarding governors. It could sort of maybe be incorporated with that. And looking out for staff as well, because they're just as likely to be victims of domestic abuse as the children and families in the schools as well. So it is all about that awareness raising and about promoting healthy relationships and challenging gender stereotypes and things like that from a young age. And I think as Megan's explained, it's we've got some good track record of looking at that already.
Would you mind if I came back just with a brief question, comment, as it were, and that is that I think, Louise, you've made a very important point in terms of our role as councillors in school governors and so on and so forth. I know we haven't done very many seminars for counsellors, or workshops as it were, but would it be possible, do you think, to arrange something for all counsellors on this area? Because the acronyms that Megan's used, I think highlights actually the extent of the service that's available, and I'm wondering how aware we all would be of these sorts of services. And I've certainly learned a lot today, so thank you for that. But I just wondered if it would be possible to broaden that.
I would definitely support that. Megan, would you be willing to do a session?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, how long do you want? I can talk for days on this.
Yeah, we'll put that in train. Yeah, that would be fantastic. Yeah. Okay,
Des, do you want a question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You mentioned Welsh Women's Aid a number of times. A few years ago, going back in my days as a magistrate, I sat on the domestic panel, and it wasn't uncommon for men to be suffering from domestic abuse as well. Are you making equal opportunities for men to come forward as you are for females?
So the statistics are extremely disproportionate, so we have to put our resource to where the data is. But that being said, you're absolutely right. There are male victims, and we do support male victims on our IDFA project. About 5% of the victims we support are men, but we have identified an increase actually in male victims over the past year. And so because of that, we've invested in a male specific role. So one of our specialist providers is going to host a specific role that has specialist training, and we'll do some awareness raising specifically to support men. So that's one role in particular. We also have in our chatbot, there's a drop down. So if you're a male, you can click on this link and it'll take you to the male specific services. So we've incorporated that into our communications campaign. Equilibrium as well works with male victims and female perpetrators, because of course sometimes the perpetrators are female, so we will offer that intervention on a one-to-one basis. So although it does sound like it's heavily weighted towards the victim work is heavily weighted towards women, that's because unfortunately the majority are women, but we definitely do recognise that there are male victims, and we make sure that they've got access to that support as well.
Okay, thank you.
Again, I'd like to stress that anybody, as you say, can be a victim of domestic abuse of all ages, sexuality, gender, and I think that the support is there, and especially the different types of domestic abuse that people can experience. It isn't just the stereotypical battered wife, although of course that sadly does exist. There's also coercion and control and financial abuse and emotional abuse. So it's really, really important to be aware of that can affect everybody, and the different types and things to look out for.
Did you want to come back in on that, Des, because your hand is still up?
No, sorry, Chair.
Okay. Cyril, did you want to come in?
Just going on Des' question. Jane, case, I think somebody has got a mic on because I'm on back. Would it be a case of men ego you're not getting the numbers of men reporting it? And secondly, I am really happy to hear that once a child or a woman has come into this, they haven't got to keep on making new statements, because I suppose for especially a woman and a child, that if they've got to keep on fetching this horrible thing back up about the beatings, it must be awful off-putting, But again, I'd like to reiterate what Louisa said. This is a brilliant report, and obviously you've all worked hard on this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think just to pick up on that, I think you're right. I think there is definitely male victims are potentially underrepresented because of the male ego and the stigma attached to being a male victim of abuse. I think you're correct, and there's more and more happening in the media to try and address that. I suppose we'll never really know the real picture, because research tells us that men and women are unlikely to report. So what we know about is probably the tip of the iceberg. What I will say is that a lot of our reports that come in, it's not the victim reporting. It's quite often a neighbour or, you know, a member of the public or somebody, you know, a family member, things like that. And still the majority appears to be women. But I do think you're right. I think that is an element of why we see less men. And that'll be part of our male victim role for next year. Well, not just to support male victims, but also to get that message out there that there's no shame in being a victim and that there is support available. And in relation to children and people having to repeat their story, again, that is the ethos that runs through the Domestic Abuse Hub. You know, our sort of mantra is right person at the right time. So you don't have to keep telling everybody that you referred to over and over again. So if there's somebody you've told your story to, the idea is that that person then will hopefully support you or support you into support with someone else. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, a couple of points for myself, if I may. Not a small point, but a very important one, I think. When I looked at the figures, I was very surprised to see about 4,300, 4,400 children were affected by domestic violence. This must be close to 8 to 10% of the young people population in Swansea, I guess. And I hadn't realised it was as widespread as that in terms of the impact on children. But obviously, it even lays out even more the importance of the work you're doing. But that, I must, from my personal point of view, that figure did surprise me, and I just thought I'd say that. And on page 10, Q3 report, you were talking about a funding gap in terms of across Western Bay for prevention work in particular. But overall, you've said you've had a lot of grant money available currently. Are you satisfied at this point in time that you have enough funding to do what you think you want to do, or need to do, and then go on to say what you want to do, I guess, because those are two slightly separate things. I guess you're going to say probably no to the second one, but more importantly, have you got enough funding currently to do what is necessary at this time?
So if I answer that one, and I'm sure Meg and Kelly can, so they're glaring at me because if I said yes, we have enough funding, they'd be really cross with me. So no, the answer is no, we don't, because there is that. So what does that real primary prevention work that we've just talked about really look like, and how do we get really upstream of that work is, and how we do that and how we resource to do it. There is a funding gap there. So we're really happy that we've had additional funding and that we've been able to work together and with different partners across sort of Swansea and the region to draw down as much as possible. But there is probably still a funding gap in terms of that demand coming through, and to fund all elements of it, because it's not just one part of it. So to make sure that we really do truly sort of embed that right person, right support, right time, and only telling your story once, it is a lot. So it's really positive that we've had more this year, and Welsh Government have recognised that. However, we're still appealing to Welsh Government to say, what does this look like in the future? Because it's not one-off grant funding or annual grant funding renewing over and over again is just really not helpful for sustainability and growing services. So it's something we challenge Welsh Government on quite a lot, because it's really difficult. And I was with them this morning saying the very thing that comes out of my mouth all the time is, what does that look like for, so especially if you're investing in prevention, it doesn't, it's a one-off injection of cash at the last minute or in a year is not good. It's not good enough. We do the best we can with it, and I got to say they're very inventive of coming up with things really quickly and what we can do. But for the long term of it, no, it would need to be sort of mainstreamed and embedded much more in our core business or in our revenue support grant, of how we drive that forward. But we'll keep going with them without talking to them about doing that. Not sure if I answered the question.
I'm sure you have, Jane, in that sense, obviously. And asking the question, I suppose the answer was going to be obvious anyway, in one respect. But having said that, I know it's certainly something that we've expressed concern before as Child and Family Services with our budgets, that we are exposed to grants, and grants can be turned on and off like a tap, and that is a concern. Not quite sure, and just wondering whether there's anything that we can do to help you in this respect as scrutiny panels, and I'm sure Sue is listening to this as well, and she would pick it up. I'm not quite sure where we can take it, but whether we could look at it, if there's anybody that we can particularly contact and make the case for you, then if you could just drop Liz a line and let us know, and we can pick it up and take it from there. What I think I'm trying to say is where can we help you as a scrutiny panel? Where can we help you to provide the service that you want to provide?
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you both. That's really great. And I know that Dave Howe spoke about it in the last joint scrutiny when you looked at budgets, in particular in terms of the grant funding and the risk around it, because all of the grant funding is funding our prevention work, and obviously that's so important. And where does it go? I'll do a bit of work and I'll come back if that's okay, to see what we need to do to where it needs to go, if that's all right. Yes,
of course, Jane. We'd be pleased to do what we can.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
You want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Bess. I mean, I suppose just on that point around the funding, when across we meet as cabinet members across Wales, social care cabinet members, it is something we regularly bring up with the minister around, particularly the ICF funding, but other funding streams as well, and needing certainty and more permanence of that. So I think probably having some support from Scrutiny for continuing to do that is always going to be helpful, to continue raising that with the minister as well.
Okay, I think we will be happy to do anything we can in that respect. You just let us know what you want and we'll see what we can sort out from there. Anybody got any other questions now as for the team? Well, before I say thank you very much for the presentation, it is obviously a subject which causes a lot of heartache for awful lot of people, and is a very important element of the work you do. So thank you very much for what you do. Thank you very much for the presentation as well. I did see a hand for a second, but I think it's gone back down. But anyway, as I say, thank you very much for the work that you do. Anything that we can do to help, we'll only be so happy to do. And if you want to leave now, you're very welcome, or you can stay. And I'll say that to the adult social services members as well. You're very welcome to stay and hear the rest of the meeting in terms of what will be child and family services matters. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. That moves us on to the next item on the agenda, and if I can find the right piece of paper, is performance monitoring. Are you going to take us through this, Julie?
I am, Chair, yes, thank you very much. It's quite a hard act to follow from that report. It's very comprehensive and very positive. So, so building on that positivity, you've had the January performance report for Child and Family Services. And I'm really pleased and proud to say that overall the performance across the service is good. As at the end of January, despite the impact that COVID has had on staff absences and the way that we deliver our service, we over December, January, we did have quite a number of staff that were impacted by COVID-related absences, but thankfully that's reduced in the most recent months. So it's really good to see that. So just taking you from early help through to the care leaving service, what I wanted to highlight to you, which isn't in the report at the moment, is the increasing referrals that we get into our early help hubs. Kelly and Megan mentioned those hubs, which were established and started up in April last year. And it's been quite a difficult journey for them because they've not been able to do the work in schools that they hoped to be able to do. But what we've noticed, particularly since about September, is that we're getting more and more contact from particularly schools and also other agencies as well. So we get about 100 referrals a week into the early help hubs and the domestic abuse hub. And what we're looking to do following the implementation of the new client information system, which is called lovely acronym of WCCIS, WCCIS, is that we'll be able to include some performance data in future reports once we've actually consolidated that, so to give you an overview of what's happening in relation to the early help part of child and family services. But what that means is that that's helping to reduce the demand on supported care planning teams in child and family services, and also meaning that we've got significantly less and a good positive low rate of re-referrals into the service. So what that tells me and will tell us is that families are getting the right support at the right time and timely interventions, which is helping to prevent the need for statutory intervention, which I think is good. But what we're working towards now as we start on our road of recovery out of COVID is that we can start to establish that direct working in schools, which I think will have really positive benefit for children and families, particularly around emotional health and wellbeing. So we'll start to bring information on that as we start to gather that as this year progresses. What will help in relation to managing the demand into the service is the launch of something called a threshold document, which describes the continuum of need from level 1, which is universal services, through to level 4, which is statutory, and that will help our partner agencies to understand what they need to refer into child and family services when. And certainly schools are eagerly anticipating this document and are supporting us to finalise it and pull it together. So I'm just pulling out the highlights from the report. The average caseloads have slightly reduced in supported care planning, but what I would say is that we're dealing with more complex children and families. So although the caseloads may have gone down from an average of 15 to 14, the families we're dealing with have more challenges and more complexity. And we're seeing that that's in part due to COVID restrictions and people not being able to do the things that they used to be able to do and not being in school in the way or as often as they used to be, for example. And hopefully you'll see in the report the assessment timeliness has improved. So we've been on an upward journey of improvement since I think the last report, which is a very low rate. And at the end of January, we were just under 80%. So I'm really pleased to report that the support that we put in and targeted intervention has worked, and we hope to see that so despite some of the staffing challenges, the team have really worked well together to ensure that assessments are completed on time. Numbers of children on the Child Protection Register has slightly reduced, which I think is a good sign in terms of maybe indicative of working earlier on with families. But we are still quite high. We did have quite an increase from about October through to early January. And our Looked After Children reduction strategy is working well in Swansea. We have an operational group that oversees achieving permanence for our Looked After children. And what that means is that since about November last year, the numbers of children that we look after as a local authority has been reduced. So we're about just over 20 less now than we were in about November. But also we are having a steady flow of special guardianship orders being granted for children in the courts. And that means that they're staying permanently within a family, within their family or their wider family network, which is a key part of our Safe Looked After Children reduction strategy. Another positive thing to report is that placement stability has been really strong during COVID. Despite the challenges that our carers face in either their own personal circumstances of feeling worried about COVID and also young people struggling with COVID regulations and COVID rules. So that's down to the really good support available, particularly to our foster carers, our in-house foster carers, and also the social work team. So it's really, really pleasing to see that. And that means the stability of young people is really important for them to try and help them cope and manage through these really difficult times. The Youth Justice Service, which I know is another area of interest that you regularly ask about, is also on an improvement journey. And in January, you will have noticed that all of the assessments that were required to be completed within 20 days were. So what that team has had a real concerted effort to have a very targeted plan in place to achieve improvements with good management oversight and workers understanding what they need to do when and why. And that's continuing to reap benefits in relation to that service improving. And all the young people that need a pathway plan, all of our children in care and our care leavers have a pathway plan now. That's good to see, and that's a consistent performance indicator that we're achieving. And it was really good to see that although we had 7 young people that presented as homeless, because of the support and interventions that we put in place for them, none of them actually became homeless. We managed to find some support and interventions that enable them to have safe accommodation. So those are the highlights that I wanted to pull out from the report, Chair, and happy to take any questions or queries that any members got. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any hands up at the moment, but if anybody has any questions, would you like to make them now, please? In that case, obviously, I couldn't let you go without any questions, could I? Certainly on page 2, I think, of the report, a figure that surprised me a little bit was the the sinks number, which has dropped quite significantly, I think, over the last few months. I don't know whether that causes you any concerns.
No, Chair, it's what we did was we pulled a team together with a manager and reviewed all of the sinks cases. And what we wanted to do, because sinks cases shouldn't be held open for very long, it's short-term intervention and preventing the need to perhaps get children go on the register. So what we ensured was that all of the children that needed to be sinks were, and those that weren't were either closed or stepped down. So it was a very healthy exercise that we undertook, and made sure that the children and families received timely interventions where they were required.
So basically what you're saying, the reduction is due to the work you've done in taking off that list children that you didn't think needed to be there at the end of the day then? Yeah,
they either didn't need to be a sinks case, or they would benefit from receiving support through the early help hub. So that's called stepping down, and a very small number needed to be stepped up in terms of needing to go on, looking at going on the child protection register. So going through an initial child protection register, that was a very low number. There weren't many of those.
Okay, and then on page 7, we signs of safety work. Quite low figures there, unfortunately. Presumably that's due to the situation that we've had over the last few months, is it?
Actually, it's a little bit of that in terms of it's been very challenging to in completing face-to-face work with children and families, but also we have a bit of a system issue. So with Paris, the current system that we have, and you have to, unless you record something in a very specific way in terms of what it's called, the system finds it difficult to pull it out and report on it. So it requires a bit of a manual exercise. So we know from the information that is seen in case supervision that the work is happening. It's just we haven't cracked the vagaries of Paris to be able to consistently report it in the right way. But this will all be solved by WICIS, where it would be much simpler for social workers to be able to tag things in the right way so we can report it off the system very readily, whereas at the moment it is a bit of a challenge. And if you wanted any more technical detail on that, I've just seen Damien pop up on my screen, who can offer if you wanted to. But yes, it's something we've been looking into for the past 4 or 5 months, and it is just a bit of a faff, for want of a technical term, for the social workers to be able to record it on the system. And I don't want them spending lots and lots of time trying to record it on the system. I'd much rather spend their time working directly with children and families and completing our assessments on time.
No, I can understand.
But we have a solution so that you will start to see the true picture once we move over to our new system of WICIS.
How far off is that at the moment then?
We are going live. Can you remember the exact date, Damon? It's middle of April, isn't it?
12th of April.
12th of April we go live. Imminent. We're all very excited.
It must be putting a certain amount of workload onto you doing that as well, isn't it?
Yes, I mean the Paris will go. Yes, Paris will go down for a few days, so we have to record manually. But fortunately, because it's over a bank holiday period, the amount of recording that we're having to do manually and then catch up with will be less than it would be otherwise. But we've got a system, a business continuity plan in place that Damien's overseeing, so I'm confident that we will catch up quite quickly in putting everything back on the new system that needs to be there.
Well, hopefully the investment and effort to get the change will see the advantage of
absolutely.
Afterwards.
Yeah, definitely.
Come in, Mike.
Sorry, yeah, thanks, Julie. I picked up the comment about perhaps some of the incidents not having been picked up because children weren't in school. I don't necessarily want to focus on that because I would guess that that will, during the course of the schools getting back up to speed, as it were, that we might see a difference in that. But I just wanted to ask a more general question in connection with how the relationship between children and family services and schools is going, and in terms of individual schools or education generally, are you getting the level of cooperation needed in order to identify potential problems?
I would say that it's overall a positive picture, Mike. We have regular meetings with education colleagues on a weekly basis to review the children we're most worried about, to make sure that they are seen either by us, by their school or by health colleagues, and that's been a really positive development. And then schools are working with us on the new threshold document, very keen to engage with us on that. And then we are working with education colleagues to look at the implications of the new Additional Learning Needs Act that's coming out imminently. So I would say we have very positive working relationships with a number of individual schools, and strategically have some positive relationships also, but there's still areas for improvements, but we're all very committed to finding solutions so that we continue to work together positively with clear joint outcomes in mind. So I'm very hopeful and very pleased with the work and endeavours that we've been working on of late since I've been in post.
Yeah, thanks. And so the new information system that you referred to and Damien's involved with, do education have access to that?
No, they don't.
Are health going to have access to it?
Yes.
Yes, I thought so, yeah. Okay. Just for well, before we've quite finished this, on page 19 you have supervision. I always like to ask a question about supervision and about Town Hill Pod 1, I think, on this occasion, where the figure's quite low. I don't know whether that gives you any cause of concern.
It's a system recording issue again. What we did was I checked with my managers and they checked with their managers that the supervision had taken place, and so we have got the records. They just haven't been uploaded, and some of them is due to staff being off and ill, and so we've got a bit of a lag. So no, it's not something I'm unduly concerned about. But we try and put support in place to try and make sure things are recorded to give an accurate picture of the activity that's taken place.
And you commented on the next page also already, which is the case management, in terms that you're saying that the numbers are down a little bit, but the complexity is increased. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't got any other questions. I don't think. Has anybody else got any other questions? I know we'll talk about the youth justice system at our next meeting, notionally, anyway, so we haven't gone into any depth on that. So perhaps at that stage, has anybody got any questions? If not, we will move on to item 8, which is Safeguarding Quality Unit Annual Report. Who's presenting this one?
That'd be me.
Pardon?
That's me.
Okay, Damien. I'll come back to you in a second. I'll just say, first of all, then to Julie, thank you very much for your presentation on the last one, because I should have said that. Apologies for not saying it then. But certainly, it's these figures are always interesting as far as I'm concerned, but that's another matter. They all know I'm a bit of an anorak when it comes to that, but that's, you won't argue about that. So on to item 8 then, if we may, and over to you, Damien.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Hopefully you've all had an opportunity to see the report. I'm just going to go through, rather than it in complete blow by blow, I'm going to go through the main highlights of that report and the purpose of it, if that's okay, and then take any questions. So this is the annual report looking at the activity within the Service Quality Unit from April 2019 to March of last year, although the COVID update at the end of it actually takes us beyond the March date, just to be sort of clear, because I thought it would be helpful to sort of have a developed picture around some of the COVID work that's gone on within this part of the service. So the report is going to focus on the data of the quality assurance monitoring. It's going to look at participation, how we've done with personal education plans, health assessments, life journey work, advocacy and dispute resolution protocols for children who are on the Child Protection Register. So it breakdown of the team profile. Again, we've got 9 independent reviewing officer Child Protection chairs full-time and another 5 who are part-time. And they're supported then by a small number of conference secretaries and admin support workers. The caseloads for the IROs, you're looking at each IRO having 50 looked after children and 20 child protection families. So a total caseload of around 70. Just to make people aware that that's in line with the practice standards and the IRO standards of what is expected across Wales for a proportionate number of children and families that IROs, child protection chairs, should be working with. So the work programme, just to remind everyone that the work programme was to undertake a review of Swansea Looked After Children reviews to promote the voice of the child and what matters to them, how life journey work continues through our involvement and trajectories to support our safe lack reduction strategy. Going to revisit the pilot scheme of children post 18 and category 2 leaving care status who remain vulnerable. And we were going to revisit a dispute resolution protocol to include child protection and LAC. Really quick update on that. That was actually taken up by the Regional Safeguarding Board as a joint venture between Neath and ourselves so that we could get consistency across both local authorities and the Safeguarding Board. And that work has been completed and signed off by the Safeguarding Board. The final piece of work that was happening within the Service Quality Unit at that time was working with the University of Bedfordshire in developing a contextual safeguarding approach to safeguarding children and young people from exploitation and extrafamilial harm and risk. So just as a quick update of the progress, so the team continued to focus on work with children in care and how we can improve their experiences through the LAC review process. Coronavirus and our ability to consult with young people and children on what matters to them has impacted a little bit on perhaps some of the group work that we were initially planning to do. But it's also meant that we've adapted and found other virtual platforms to engage with young people, which has actually, in some cases, had some more positive outcomes and made young people, perhaps more, certainly older young people, easier to engage with some of the questions and systems that we'd like them to. We've got a review. The second point then is that a review was carried out with the Child Protection Conference process. Through that, we introduced regular qualitative auditing of child protection conferences. We've got a weekly meeting to review decision making in respect of undertaking all child protection activity. We've identified some improvements needed within science and safety methodology within conferences, including how we record minutes and making sure that our recording is as robust as it should be, and also that our information sharing with families and with colleagues is consistent. We also work with the University of Bedfordshire to develop then a contextual safeguarding model. During this period, the role of what was the practice lead for disruption and exploitation actually moved from within the Service Quality Unit to the IIAA. The purpose of that was that actually that the overall reach of that role was much better placed within the front door service, offering advice to across the entire continuum and overseeing the work across the whole service rather than just within the child protection and looked after arena. And through that, we've developed a contextual missing exploitation trafficking pathway and response. And we implemented that in 2020, at the end of 2020. And that work is ongoing at the moment, and the University of Bedfordshire are working with us on an evaluation. We're continuing to work with Bays and Barnardo's in supporting a review of care and support plans for young people who are vulnerable post-18. And then the other bit then that I think is worth highlighting is, as a local authority, we've been leading the way in Wales by using an innovative LAC savings scheme to give care experienced children in Swansea a better chance of thriving into adulthood. The new savings scheme was launched last year to enable £5 a week to be set aside by an internal and external care providers. Between the 6th of October 2019 and the 31st of October 2020, we've deducted £91,000 of carers allowance to contribute into children's savings. It's saved safely and securely for looked after children, and after 12 months placed into junior ISA account, tax advantage savings policies instigated by the government but managed by a registered charity, the Share Foundation. And then if at any time that young people leave care, the money is distributed to the caregiver with PR or directly to the young person leaving care once they reach 18. If I can move on now, just as an update then on to some of the data and the key themes. Firstly, in child protection, so total number of child protection conferences, been an increase in the number of child protection conferences during this period of time. Number of children on child protection register in this time. Timescales in initial conferences remains really good and compliant with our statutory requirements. We've had some busy times that we wouldn't expect, such as in December, we saw a drop in referrals and then a pickup in January and February. But trying to pick up trends and themes within how and when children come on and off a register is quite a difficult thing to do. It doesn't necessarily follow any set patterns. During this period, we took an audit of 23 initial child protection cases, and that actually we looked at those and thought that half of those were coming at the right time. But actually, what we identified in the other half is that actually we needed to be slowing our thinking down and undertaking and completing assessments. So we're doing some work with the area teams in order to support some of that slowed down thinking, making sure that assessments have been fully completed, that we're using and utilising family network meetings to the best of, and the most effective way in order to be able to look at whether or not we really do need to proceed to conference at that time. We're also looking at need to monitor the increase of referrals in certain months, as I've said, but again, that's difficult. And now we do, as I say, have a weekly review safeguarding meeting. We've put that in place since mid last year, mid 2020, which is reviewing then threshold decisions every week of children that are escalating up into conference arena, but also children that have been deregistered at first review, just so that we're trying to identify any learning opportunities, but also to reassure ourselves that actually children are moving through the system in the right way and the most supportive and productive way. Total number of re-registrations. So there's been a reduction on children being placed back on the register within 12 months. Slight increase in re-registrations overall, but actually that's against a backdrop of more children going on the register. There were some issues around audit that we needed to audit neglect cases because we've been changing categories. Number of different issues around that. I think that as we've developed training for our child protection chairs around categories, being able to have more direct and meaningful conversations with social workers and professionals within those conferences to recognise, I think, better categories, and also where children have been registered in one category, reviewing and reflecting whether or not those categories are still appropriate or whether things have actually changed and the harm has actually shifted. It's worth noting as well that so one of the other figures that's up there is how long children on the child protection register. So just to make it sort of more meaningful, 270 days, or give or take, is about 9 months. And what that means is that that's what we should be expecting, that the majority of the children that go on a child protection register should be deregistered around that time, because that is the time of the second child protection review. So the closer we are to that number, the more positive it is that we are intervening and supporting children in what we think is the right way. If that number gets lower, then there's a concern that we may be deregistering children too quickly. And if it goes higher, then obviously there's a concern then that we've got children who are staying on the child protection register where that risk is remaining for considerable periods of time. So total number of review child protection conferences. So during this period, the deregistration at first review dropped, but we need to carry on monitoring this, and that is something, and that's an ongoing piece of work. Susan, you put your hand up. Do you want to ask me a question now? I'm more than welcome to take it now. Oh, you're on mute, Susan. Sorry.
You're on mute, Susan.
Thank you for allowing me to question. Are education involved with the de-escalating cases?
Yeah, so if the child is in school and of school age, then yes, education will attend all child protection conferences, initial ones and review conferences, and will be one of the agency decision makers about agreeing whether or not a child needs to remain on a child protection register or they then can be removed from the register. And actually during this time, education attendance is always very, very good across the board. Okay, no problem at all. Yep. Moving now into looking after children. Is that okay? So total number of LAC reviews, LAC population at the end of that year of last year was financially was 566. Total number of children who became looked after 147, and total number of children who ceased to be LAC was 135. I think positively less children became looked after compared to the previous year, but there was a slight reduction in children ceasing to be LAC, and the overall number of children at the end of the year increased. Almost all LAC reviews have been held within timescales. I'll talk about PEPs a little bit later on, although there's some data in that part of the report, but I'll come back to PEPs in a minute. A number of children continue to have a plan for permanence post the second review. A small number of young people who were post 16 and asylum seeking. It's a piece of work that we've picked up in trying to support and manage and look at longer term permanence, certainly for our unaccompanied asylum seekers. And that is an ongoing piece of work at the moment. And we're continuing to maintain and work on achieving 100% plans of permanency for all children and young people, and we're monitoring this as closely as we can through the LAC review process and through case management. I then move on to what we call independent reviewing officer monitoring. So when collating the information recorded at this point, there were a couple of issues that we had about how we captured that. So this report was actually run a couple of times to make sure that we were capturing all the information that we needed. And we have a quality assurance monitoring form, which is what the QAMF is standing for. And what we got 98% of those reports were done, and they're done following every LAC review. So they are done as part of all the LAC review to look at the quality assurance monitoring within the LAC review, looking at key information and data to ensure that that plan is working, that there isn't any drift, that the actions and the tasks that have needed to be completed are being done in a timely and positive manner. And if not, then there is a protocol to follow in order to be able to escalate and address those issues. A couple of issues, but we're targeting some staff where there's been some issues around compliance, but also WCCIS will help us with that. We keep saying that WCCIS is going to help us with lots of things. Let's hope that it delivers on the things that we're being promised. But I am more hopeful because the way that forms work in WCCIS is very different to how forms and how we capture forms in Paris works. So we won't need to attach things into the system. They will be built into the system, which makes it much easier for us to control, monitor, and also how we can have mandatory documents that must be completed. At the moment, sometimes it's hard to track mandatory forms without physically going in and reading everything. The system won't tell us all of those things. New system, as I say, for QAMPs will. And then some other highlights then. Participation, been an improvement in children and young people participating in their reviews, with 40% of children participating or chairing their review. Over half of our looked after children did participate in the LAC review, but didn't attend. So what that means is that the IRO has spoken to them outside of that, tried to support them with coming, but actually has ensured that they've been able to seek their wishes, their feelings, what matters to them, and get their views to share within that forum and that meeting. There was an issue that for 90 children, we don't know if they participate in the meetings, and that's to do with how the system is recording that. Again, I'm hoping that WCCS will resolve that in terms of, as I've just explained, how it records information. And as part of the review of children and the LAC reviews, we were hoping to organise a participation day where we could bring some looked after children together and start thinking about other ways that they can be engaged in the looked after process. But COVID sort of scuppered that. It was planned for March of last year, the week after we went into lockdown, unfortunately. And then since then, while we have done engagement with young people, actually we haven't picked this specific task up during this period, but it is something that we will now be looking at how we can do that, whether it be needing to be remotely or whether in the summer we will be able to do something slightly different.
I think
I've got Hazel's hand up. Yes, I was just going to say, Hazel, did you want to ask a question?
Well, I don't know that's appropriate at this particular moment. I'm wondering, during the last year we've been at COVID, how much information were we able to maintain about children who were educated at home? It's been difficult enough to keep in touch with the ones who are in school. It must have been far more different to the ones who weren't in school, and they are concerning me at this moment.
So that information is held by the education departments rather than by social services.
Oh,
so children who are educated, so home education and elective home education is monitored and governed via Kate Phillips and her education and that service directorate. So that isn't data that I've got access to, unfortunately.
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine, Hazel.
Okay.
Des, I've got you've got a question?
Yeah, just a comment really.
Yes.
On the advocacy issue, it's good to see the increasing number of children aware of what advocacy means, because you remember we did express in committee whether they would understand, but I think it's feeding its way through perhaps, and they are being more aware, so that's good.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is really positive. I think one of the things that we don't understand fully at the moment is why we have a smaller uptake of children wanting to accept the active offer of an advocate. And I think that's the next piece of work that we need to do with young people, is to start exploring, now that you've got an advocate and you understand what they are, why would you not want them supporting you? What would make you change your mind? So that's a piece of work that we want to take forward now, now that we've got to that kind of benchmark, really.
Yeah, sure. Okay, good. Thanks.
Our figures lower than other areas then, Damien, are you saying?
I haven't done a comparison recently of our figures, actually, and I can do that. I think advocacy is, I don't think they're that different to anywhere else. I think advocacy and active offer advocacy of young people taking it up is a challenge. When I've spoken to other colleagues, I haven't got exact numbers, but I think that it is an area that needs further exploration, I think, not just in Swansea.
There was a concern over advocacy because Welsh Government asked you to change mechanisms, or I'm trying to remember exactly what that was. Was it the commissioning process, is it?
Yeah, that's right. Yes. That was a few years ago now, though, wasn't it? So yeah, and it was looking at who was providing that and whether or not it was offering the best kind of support that it should. And I think it is. I think that the feedback of the advocacy has been positive. So when young people have accepted and have the active offer advocacy taken up, that they find that helpful. So I think that it's not necessarily about what's being offered when they got the advocate. I think that it's more just encouraging and supporting young people to say, I will have an advocate and this is what it can benefit me with. But,
I think there was cost implication concerns, as I remember. But
inevitably there would have been.
Yes. All right. Sue, you've got a question.
I just wondered if the advocate is a consistent person, and is that the reason why the child is perhaps not going further, because somebody has changed?
No, the advocate should be the consistent person. So it's not a group of advocates. Once you've got an advocate given to you, unless they leave that service, then they would be with you then throughout that whole time. I think that it's not even people taking it up and then that changing. I think it is just not taking it up at all. And I suppose that as we unpack and unpick that, both locally and I think that nationally, that needs to be looked at. We may be able to then think of other alternatives and solutions really to try and support that.
Thank you.
Bon, did you have a question?
Yes, I do, Chair. Thanks. My question is going back a bit before I speak about the advocacy. And I wanted to ask, how many unaccompanied asylum seeker children do we have? Do we know?
We do. Is it, how many have we got at the moment, Julie? Is it, I haven't got the figure right in front of me at the moment. It's about.
I can quickly have a look.
You can always email. You can always email them to me. It's not.
Yeah, I can look quickly and I'll put it in the chat in about 2 minutes. The number.
Okay, fine.
Thanks, you, Julie.
My other question, Chair, if I may, is no question, suggestion. I used to be an advocate, but I know in Swansea it became that you couldn't be a volunteer. You know, we weren't using volunteers anymore. Am I right?
We don't. So we commission the service that provides the advocate rather than us being the lead for the advocate.
Okay.
So that would be about the commissioning agreement with the provider.
Okay, because I know that
It's running low. Everything is
this was at the secure unit. I know that the child had a choice, and so they would choose who they wanted to be their advocate. You know, you like. So I'm not sure if that's something to consider. You sort of explain to them why, rather than the organization explaining, that it was you yourself that would explain what you would be bringing to the table. And I did think that made a bit of a difference. So
yeah, I'm really keen to hear from young people initially themselves about what their views are about why they're not taking it up. But I think that is a really good point. And I think that we need to consider all of those kinds of things once we've had the feedback from the young people as well about what the barriers are for them. Because otherwise, I wouldn't want to second guess what the feedback is that those young people would give us. you know, I can speculate on lots of different reasons, but I think it's important that they have an opportunity to give us that feedback first. But I do take the point, and I think that is an important point that we need to think about.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Dave.
Okay. Moving on, so personal education plans. I'm going to try and be as brief as I can. Sorry, it's a fairly detailed report, and I hope you, because obviously covering a number of quite key areas that I wanted to make sure that were highlighted to you. But PEPs, the highlight for that is that PEPs being completed in 20 days, child becoming looked after have improved, but there's still work that needs to be done around PEPs, so personal education plans. We know, so LAC Education now receive a monthly report of all upcoming PEPs that are needed in order to be a prompt for schools. I suppose that it's just important to note that it isn't just an activity of a social worker being able to complete the PEP. Actually, it's the responsibility, once we've triggered it, the school actually undertake that and then send it back to us. So there are a number of different steps, and they're not all completely in control of social workers in the department. So it's us working together as a collective unit to do that. And there's been quite a lot of progress on it, but yeah, we could still do with improving on it, certainly in terms of consistency. Health assessments, again, we're pleased that there's an increase in health assessments for looked after children, completed in time for LAC reviews. There were 175 not completed in time on, or on the system in time, so there's still some work to be done around that.
We were always given to understand, Damien, that a lot of that was due to children who were not in the city council area.
Yes.
External to it. Is that still the case?
For some it is. Yes, I haven't got the full narrative behind all of the detail of that. It's a piece of work that I'm trying to look at why they wouldn't be. But yeah, there is certainly, when they're out of our area, health changed the system about who took which health board took responsibility for completing that. So that has definitely a significant contributing factor.
Okay. Because obviously you would expect to see 100% there, as with the PEPs as well, I would think.
Yes, you would. Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So there was a process issue. So some of it was a recording issue, which we've now addressed, but it wasn't addressed at the time that the report was written. Just as again, it's a change of process between us and health and information sharing, which I believe is now, well, it has been resolved and there is a better process in place. But I know we're now meeting more regularly with the LAC health managers, just to make sure that, as you say, Paxton, that if there are things within our local area that are being missed or that are problematic, that we've got solutions to those, and also to help offer us advice and guidance of children out of our area and how we can sort of ensure that we're promoting those within those health board regions. Susan, you got your hand up?
Again, thank you. Yeah. I'm just wondering if CAMS is involved with that section.
CAMS isn't part of the health assessment itself, so that's about the statutory LAC health assessment for looked after children, rather than specialist kind of health follow-up or health plans. So it could form part of it, but that isn't what is incorporated into that core data, because that's obviously specific on a child-by-child kind of basis.
Right, because I'm aware, I think, that mental illness and health is going to be increased with the COVID, and I just wondered where we were going with that.
So we meet regularly with CAMS to review what their intake is like. We're also, obviously, schools are linked in with CAMS as well, and we are monitoring that, ensuring that young people that we are working with and looked after children that that are in our care have access and referrals through to CAMS. But it is an emerging kind of picture really at the moment, and again it's difficult. I think that there's lots of predictors of what may happen, but at the moment it's a little bit early to tell, but we are having those dialogues and those conversations.
Well, I think even before the COVID it was a problem to get a referral to CAMS, and that's going to increase the problems, I'm sure. There we are.
I mean, the health board are aware of that, and they are things that have been raised on a number of different occasions. And as I say, at the moment, that is something that we're sort of monitoring and looking at how we work and promote and support. I can see other hands up, Paxton. I'll need you to tell me who they are. There I can just see hands rather than any names.
Yvonne's has been up for some time. I assume she's already asked the questions, but Elliot, you wanted to come in?
Sorry.
Yeah, just on the cams. I mean, I know you've got it's on the work plan going forward to review the cam situation. I mean, I suppose it depends, Councillor Jones, whether you're talking about specialist cams or the more primary sort of intervention cams, you know, and not all young people are going to need the level of intervention that specialist cams would provide, because, you know, there's a threshold for what needs to be achieved there. But I think it's, you know, it is point working, you know, looking at the primary things. So perhaps that's something that Scrutiny need to pick up with the health board when they come to talk about cams. I think, is it next month that's in the schedule for the May meeting? So, but I think it's an important point. You know, I think we can expect to see an increase. You know, the burden around the pandemic is clearly impacted everyone, and the mental health across the board, and that links into some of the presentation earlier on around domestic violence as well. So I think it's an important issue that we need to make sure is picked up. Yeah.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, Elliot. If I can move on then to, I've talked about the advocacy, just talk about the life story work, and just that there's been an improvement in the completion of life story work, gone up to 60%. I mean, again, we'd like that to be higher, but that is an improvement from the year before, and that continues to improve. We've developed a module on Paris where all life journey material can be stored, and in a new system there's a better way of storing that information again so that we can track that more robustly. We know we have 344 children without life story work, and we worry that we're not sure where some of that is recorded, and again lots of this is about recording issues rather than the work not being undertaken and carried out. So we're reassuring ourselves through the conversation that work is happening, but it isn't on the system. So when we're looking then at pulling the data and the information off, we're not able to report as robustly as we want to on some of this. So WCCS will address again some of those issues for us, which can only be a positive thing. And then we need to then start thinking about how we continue to improve, working with supported care planning and working with the looked after children's team around ongoing life story work, including therapeutic life story work for children.
That is important, isn't it, in getting that? I know we've been following that story now for the last 18 months, 2 years, I guess.
Yeah.
Looking for that improvement. Yeah.
Yeah. So there is improvement, whether it's and things are progressing. And it is very much on the forefront of our action plan of things that we need to keep sort of striving to develop. Dispute resolution protocol, I've talked about that. Actually, we have a very small number of actual formal disputes around that. Is around protocol and process of parents complaining about the category or how their child has ended on the register, and there are specific criteria in which can be appealed around that. But as I say, that's been taken up regionally by the Regional Safeguarding Board, which I think is right and a good place for that work to have sat. Then the other bit then was just, so that's the main bulk of the overall report. The last bit that is in there then is around the COVID-19 response within SQU. Do you mind if I just take you through a couple of points? I'm conscious that we're running over time. No. Are you okay if I just run you through that briefly?
That'll be fine, Damien. I think we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. So we've continued with our statutory duties in respect of all child protection conferences, as well as undertaking LAC reviews during this time, and all of our core business has been completed. But we've developed guidance on Microsoft Teams for staff setting up meetings. So we've moved to virtual meetings rather than face-to-face meetings, in line with public health and Welsh Government advice and guidance. But we've risk assessed staff to support those who do need to shield with health issues. We've looked at exceptional circumstances where it's important that the independent reviewing officer may go and visit a looked after child because they may have the longest standing formulated relationship. And we've looked then at following and ensuring that we're following the necessary guidance to do that. Supported staff to work from home. We've made some changes to the paperwork again in order to be able to support and work from home. So in child protection conferences, lots of it was mapped out on whiteboards. Well, obviously, if you're doing that from your own home, you're not going to have all of the whiteboards and everything. So we've just altered the way in which we can visualize and show information during that period and supported the staff with that. We did prioritise initial child protection conferences when we were allowed to be in an office for the child protection chair to be in Cocket House. No other people would be present, but then they would be having the visualisation of that board when they were able to do it again, just to facilitate and ease that work. We've all review child protection conferences, though, have all happened virtually, and we've not cancelled or moved or not done any of those duties as a result of COVID. We've ensured that we continue to stick to all of the timescales that we've been expected to do. We've been looking at red rag listed. So when we listed our most vulnerable children as a service, when we first went into COVID, the majority of those children were children on the child protection register, and one of the things that the conference chairs were doing and what the independent reviewing officer doing for looking after children was making regular contact with those children on virtual platforms as part of their welfare and check-in as an additional measure to make up for the fact that actually we weren't always able to do face-to-face visits, but that we wanted to keep up.
How do we manage if the children didn't have the equipment?
We provided them with the equipment.
We always did, did we?
Yeah.
Okay, right.
So we made that available. And then obviously the IROs have continued to attend virtually various other forums, multidisciplinary team meetings, or any other internal meetings that they've needed to contribute in order to be able to promote and support any care planning work that needs to be done. Supporting the staff within that team again has been really important. Again, it's been really difficult, I know, across all areas, but we've introduced more regular check-ins, and we've ensured that supervision within the service quality unit continues, including increasing support for some members of staff due to their own personal circumstances to try and help them through and manage through the various commitments. We've also kept ongoing with the quality assurance work during this time. So we've looked at, as I've said, about how we audit child protection conference reports. We've looked at reviewing deregistrations and decision making. We've looked at how we've reviewed children being, we've audited and reviewed children being registered past second review. We do weekly looked after children case audits, so dip sampling minutes, dip sampling what's going on within their care planning. And feeding that back, and then also overseeing children on our temporary child protection temporary register. So that would be children who are not Swansea children per se. They're children who've moved into our local area on a child protection register from another local authority. So one of the things that we've been making sure is that we're monitoring those so that we don't end up with children sitting on a temporary register for longer than they should be. We've looked at then working out ways of catching up with minutes and reporting, and where there are gaps within our systems of trying to improve how we're recording and capturing information. We've looked at then, as I've said, some participation questionnaires for young people to complete, and that's another piece of work that we need to be building on and developing. And then it's again making sure that we've got the use and the access to all the technology that we need, which we've done. And then there's an ongoing work program then of the key things that we're looking at. This is the very last section. Continue to focus on our children in care and how we can improve their experiences through LAC review process, including the participation. We're going to continue to focus on children in residential placement to support their permanence. We want to undertake work on advocacy to understand why young people aren't taking up this offer. We're drawing on the positives of using various types of communication such as WhatsApp and Teams to develop different ways of holding meetings or involving young people in their meetings. We want to continue to work on improving our child and young people attending meetings. Continue work with Bays and Bernardo's to then start thinking about post-18 leaving care for vulnerable young people who may lack any family support. Working with the local education team around PEPs and the process of that, and then working with LAC health colleagues. So all the areas that I've identified. And then for child protection, we're going to review how child protection conferences are held, how information is captured, and thinking about further training and development for child protection chairs. Again, you know, COVID it may have created additional opportunities of different ways of us thinking about things that we do. So can we reflect on those and adapt any of those into what should be good practice and practice going forward? Going to continue to audit child protection cases. We want to take a bit of a focus about why children are changing categories and understand that a little bit more during their periods of registration, and then supporting and working with supported care planning and the integrated safeguarding hub to develop thresholds. The threshold document is obviously one thing through the front door, but it's also thinking about when things are escalating, how we're reviewing and reflecting and getting consistency internally when things need to be progressed to child protection and the timing of those. And I think that is a whistle stop. Well, it's not a whistle stop. I've talked for about 40 minutes, but Julie knows that brief is not always my best thing.
That's an understatement.
Other than that, not much to do.
I know. So we've got a quiet year ahead with you know, so I just think, I mean, the report was obviously very detailed and goes into even more detail than what I've presented to you at the moment. But I think it's important, given that it's the child protection and looked after children kind of work that's going on, that it's important to sort of drill in for yourselves to know what's going on, and to have an understanding of where we are with this key bit of work really within the service. I think overall it's a very positive kind of report of the work that we're doing. I think it's a really strong way forward with some really clear direction. I know it seems busy, but we've got a lot of focus on what we need to be doing.
Good, thank you, Damien.
Thank you, Damien. I'm just gonna push one more question in there at the moment, because you've mentioned Bays and Bernardo's. Are we satisfied with the service we're getting out of that now? And I think if you might want to come in on that, Julie, as well as Damien.
In terms of Bernardo's, the service in relation, I think it's so we're doing a piece of work looking across Bays Plus, which is we run that service for 16 plus, and then the care leaver service which Bernardo's run, and I've got some very clear ideas about the changes that I think we'd like to make to have a better service for our care leavers. So it is something that I'm actively looking at and keen to explore, so that our care leavers and our care leavers in particular have the best service that we're able to offer them, and a consistent service. Obviously, sometimes it's a challenge to offer them a service, because as adults they can turn around and say no thank you. But nevertheless, some of the ones that we're particularly worried about, it's good to ensure that we're creative in the ways we try to keep in touch. So yes, I'm sure I'll be coming back to you at some point in the not too distant future to give you an overview of that service, if that'll be helpful.
I don't know if you're aware, Julie, but certainly a few years ago we were very seriously considering bringing back the Bernardo service back in-house.
Right.
But at the end of the day, we continued to keep it with them, and we were looking for improved performance from them. So that is still, to a certain degree, as far as I'm concerned, still bedding in. I don't think we're there yet quite with it from what we've been hearing, but hopefully
that's a fair and accurate view, Paxton. I think that, and I'm very familiar with that service being within the council rather than external. That's the experience that I bring in. So that's why I'm interested to understand what benefits it's bringing and the value that it adds for our care leavers, to be absolute, to nail that absolutely.
And that's the reason why I think we need to keep looking at that to see what sort of performance we're getting from that in terms of the service that we're given.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, on the same page there with you on that one.
Okay. If there are no other questions, I can't see any other hands up. So we have Cyril's hand is up. Go on, Cyril.
Yeah, I'm sure you're going to say this, Paxton, but fair dues to Damien and Jin. That's a very well massive report there. Thank you very much.
I have to say, Cyril, I think you took the words out of my mouth there. But there we are. You're always pinching things off me, so that's nothing new anyway. But there we go. But no, obviously it was comprehensive. I don't remember having quite such a comprehensive report from the quality section before, I must admit. and it has been very interesting.
Yeah.
It's something we'll have a look at, and we'll certainly look to repeat. So many thanks for that, and obviously you've answered a lot of questions as we've gone along. Also thanks to Julie as well for the initial report that we had on performance. So thank you very much to both of you. I don't know if Elliot wants to come back in and say anything to sum up at this stage.
Thanks, Paxton. I don't think there's anything I can add. I mean, you know, obviously thanks from my perspective to Damon for bringing the report. I think it's really helpful for Scrutiny to see. So hopefully we can, you know, we can bring another report again. But I think it's really helpful to hear your comments and thoughts as well. So thank you for that. Okay, in that case, I'll say thank you very much. And on that basis, I'm going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 9, and which is a work programme timetable. We've got that in front of you at the end of the report or the agenda pack, basically, and you'll see the next meeting was scheduled to be the 5th of May. We thought, Liz and myself, that mightn't be the best of dates to hold a meeting on the day before, I think, the Assembly elections. It might be that the councils will be otherwise tied up, but that's another matter. So we're proposing to move that to the 25th, unless anybody's got any real objections to doing that. And I just wanted to make you aware of that. And obviously the programme, or what we want to be discussing there, will be the Youth Offending Service and also the progress on CAMS. Those are the 2 items for that agenda. Anybody got any questions or any comments?
No, fine.
Okay.
I think you're doing right, Paxton, by moving that to a later date.
I think so. We might not have so many people along on the 5th, I must have to say. And I know, Julie, I'm very grateful that you were able to change the date in your diary from the 5th to the 25th as well.
Yeah, she has.
So appreciate that, and thank you very much. I'm looking just to see that there are letters at the end of the agenda. But obviously you'll have seen those, and you'll have seen the comments that went out. Unless anybody's got anything else to say, can I just say thank you very much to the presenters who are still here, and if you can pass them on to the people who presented on the first item as well, on the domestic abuse, we'd be very grateful for that. And thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you on the 25th now.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you.